Shalom. We're now continuing our study of Sefer Shmuel Aleph, and we had just concluded at the end of the last perek, Shmuel Hanavi's final Teichacha and Musar, that it was wrong for them to ask for a king, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu validated that by bringing rain during the time of the harvest. And now we actually begin the reign of Shaul HaMelech. And Perek Yud Gimel begins, Ben Shana Shaul b'Malcho, Ushtei Shanim Malach al Yisrael. So the second half of the pasuk is a little easier than the first half. Shaul HaMelech's reign was only 2 years, very short, and then he was killed by the Plishtim. But the beginning part of the pasuk is difficult. Ben Shana normally means he was 1 year old, or within his first year. Obviously, Shaul was older than that. So Rashi explains that Ben Shana refers to his righteousness. Again, he quotes the Gemara in Yuma that Shaul HaMelech was so righteous, he was like a 1 year old in terms of not having any Averos. Or Rashi gives a second explanation, al pi pshat, that Ben Shana means the events that we are going to be describing in this perek took place in the first year of his reign, which B'sach HaKol was a 2 year reign. The pasuk goes on, pasuk beis, Vayibchar lo Shaul shloshes alafim Yisrael. Shaul chose, he designated what you might call a permanent army, meaning in times of national emergency, the army could be expanded to thousands and thousands of people, but his permanent army was relatively small, shloshes alafim Yisrael, 3,000 people. Vayiyu im Shaul alpayim b'michmas, 2,000 of them were garrisoned in the town of Michmas, Ubahar Beisel, and in the mountains around Beisel. The Aleph and 1,000 Hayu im Yainasan were with his son Yainasan, B'Givat Binyamin, in the hills around Shevet Binyamin. The Yeser Ha'am, and everybody besides the 3,000, Shilach Ish Leo Halav, they went home, meaning they could be drafted, they could be called up if there was a real war, but the permanent army was only 3,000 people, 2,000 with Shaul and 1,000 with Yainasan. Now, the next pasuk describes a certain event that precipitated a major war. Vayach Yainasan eis netziv Pelishtim asher bageva. Yainasan essentially assassinated, I don't know if he did it or he gave the order, the Netziv Pelishtim, kind of the administrative official of the Philistines that was in Givat Binyamin, because again, the Philistine had actually created various government positions in which they took control of different parts of Jewish territory. And this was essentially an assassination because he was oppressing the Jewish people. But the problem is, this precipitates a war. Vayishmu Pelishtim, the Pelishtim heard about the assassination of the Netziv. V'Shaul taka b'shayfer b'chol haaretz, and Shaul blew the shayfer, or had people blow the shayfer to call people to arms. Lamor Yishmu ha'ivrim, let the Hebrews, the Jews, hear that we have to get ready for war. V'chol Yisrael shamu lamor, and all the Yisrael got the message. Hika Shaul Netziv Pelishtim. Now this is very interesting. Shaul essentially endorsed what Yainasan did. It was a good step to kill that Philistine ruler because he was oppressing Klal Yisrael, and therefore it even says, therefore, that although it was Yainasan that either did it or gave the order, what the message that was conveyed is Shaul himself killed the Netziv of the Plishtim, but unfortunately, Gam Nivash Yisrael Ba'Plishtim, the Jewish people became repulsive and disgusting in the eyes of the Philistines. Vayitzaku ha'am acharei Shaul ha'Gilgal, and all of the people were stirred up to go to Shaul in the main meeting place of Gilgal. That was the first place that the Jewish people came when they crossed the Yarden, and that became a great, great meeting place. U'Plishtim nesfu lilachem im Yisrael, and the Philistines gathered to wage war against Yisrael in revenge for the killing of the Netziv. Shaloshim elef rechev, 30,000 chariots, Sheishes alofim pirashim, 6,000 horse riders, cavalry. V'am and foot soldiers, we're not even given a number. Kechol asher al svas hayam larov, were like the sand that is on the shore of the sea in terms of number. Vayalu vayachnu bamichmas kidmas beis oven. And the Pelishtim gathered this huge army in Michmas, which was east of Beis Oven. V'yish Yisrael ro ki tsarlo ki nigasam. And the Jewish people saw that they were in great adversity. They didn't have the ability, they thought, to fight this army. Ki nigasam, they are oppressed. Vayischabu ha'am b'ma'aros u'b'chavochim u'b'solaim uvatzurichim uvaboros, and they simply started hiding. They hid in caves, and they hid in big thorn bushes, and they hid behind rocks, and they hid in towers, and in boros, and in pits. However, the Ivrim avru es Yarden Eretz Gad v'Gilad, and not only that, but there were Jews who left Eretz Yisrael. They crossed the Yarden to the land of Gad and Gilad. And again, we know that Ever Yarden was land of Ruvain, Gad, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe. Here it only mentions Gad, because presumably that's where they went. V'Shaul odenu b'Gilgal, but Shaul is still in Gilgal, trying to gather his army. V'chol ha'am chardu acharav, and all of the people are following him. Now again, it's a little contradictory. The pasuk before described people hiding out of fear of the Philistine, and then this pasuk says all of the people came to Shaul b'Gilgal. So I think we have to understand it in terms of sequence. That initially, when the people heard that the Philistines were waging war with huge numbers, many people were hiding. But after Shaul made the announcement that we are going to fight them, people had more confidence, more emunah, more bitachon, and they came to Shaul in Gilgal. Now, if you remember, all the way back, Shmuel had told Shaul that when Shaul comes to Gilgal, Shmuel is going to come to him, and they will bring korbanos together. But he told Shaul to wait 7 days for me. For whatever reason, and it's very much of a mystery, Shmuel told Shaul there will be 7 days in which I will not appear. And on the seventh day, I will appear, and you are not to bring korbanos till I show up. But the pasuk says, Vayochal shivas yomim. Shaul waited 7 days. Lamoed asher Shmuel, to the time that Shmuel said he would be coming. And it was the 7th day, and Shaul thought Shmuel would be there at the beginning of the 7th day. V'lo ba Shmuel ha'Gilgal. Shmuel was not there. This, of course, is very reminiscent of the Chet Ha'egel, where Moshe was supposed to come down on day 40, and he came down a few hours later, but the people were afraid and they built an Egel. This is exactly what Shaul is doing as well, that Shaul figured Shmuel is supposed to be here. Shmuel didn't come. V'yafetz ha'amei alav, and people began leaving Gilgal. They figured if Shmuel is not here, we don't have siyata d'shmaya. And for whatever reason, Shmuel is not coming. So people begin to leave and go back to their hiding places. Vayomer Shaul agishu elai ha'elav hashlam. So Shaul says, bring me the burnt offering and bring me the peace offering. Vayal ha'ela, and Shaul brought the burnt offering. Again, remember, bamos are permitted at this time, and for the korban of a bama, you do not need a kohen. So Shaul is halachically kosher to bring these korbanos. He was going to bring the ola and the shlamim. He got a chance to bring the ola. And Shmuel now comes. After Shaul finished the burnt offering, Shmuel shows up. Shaul goes to greet Shmuel and to bless Shmuel. But Shmuel gives him teichacha. You did not fulfill your obligation to wait for me. You jumped the gun. Vayomer Shmuel, me asisa, what did you do? Vayomer Shaul, so Shaul gives an excuse. Ki raisi ki nafatz ha'amei, I saw people were leaving. V'ataloi basa, you did not come. L'moed hayamim, the time that you were supposed to come. I thought you were going to come the beginning of the seventh day. Uplishtim nesafim michmas. And the Philistines are gathering in Michmas. We had to do something. The Omar, and I said, again, Shaul is rationalizing his behavior. Ata yerdu plishtim elaya Gilgal. If the Philistines attack us in Gilgal, u'pnei Hashem lo chilisi, and I didn't pray to Hashem by bringing korbanos, then Hashem is not going to help us. V'yesapak. So I restrained myself, meaning my natural inclination would have been to wait. But I forced myself to act against my inclination. Va'aleh ha'olah, to bring the olah. Vayomer Shmuel el Shaul, and Shmuel said to Shaul, Niskolta, you made a foolish mistake. You don't make cheshbonos. If I told you b'shem Hashem that you are to wait until I come, you do not have the right to disobey, no matter how logical you think it is. Lo shamarta et mitzvahs Hashem Elokecha asher tzivach. You did not keep the commandment of Hashem that He commanded you, again, through Shmuel. Ki ata heichin Hashem es mamlachtecha el Yisrael ad olam. Had you kept the commandment of God, Hashem would have given you malchus forever. V'yata, but now, because you disobeyed Hashem's command, mamlachtecha lo yisakum, your malchus shall not last, meaning you will remain melech, but it will not be hereditary, it will not pass to your children. Bikesh Hashem lo ish kilvavo. Hashem will seek another man, kilvavo, that is attuned to Hashem's heart. Vayitzaveyu Hashem l'nagid alamo, and Hashem will make him the king, the ruler over his people. Ki loy shamarta es asher tzivcha Hashem, because you did not obey what Hashem said. Now the emes is, this is actually very, very difficult. There are really two separate kashas here. Kasha number one is, how could HaKadosh Baruch Hu say, had you obeyed the will of Hashem, your malchus would have been forever? We know that the malchus belongs to Yehuda. In fact, the Rambam writes that malchus Shaul from Shevet Binyamin by definition was going to be temporary, because permanent malchus in Am Yisrael can only be from Shevet Yehuda. As Yaakov Avinu said on his deathbed, Lo Yosur Shevet mi Yehuda, the scepter of authority shall not be taken away from Yehuda. So malchus Shaul had to be temporary. How could Hashem say, or how could Shmuel say, it would be permanent? So here the Meforshim explain that avada, it does not mean that Shaul's malchus would have been permanent. For sure, it would have been replaced by a malchus based of it. But what it means is that Shaul's zera could have been the prime ministers, they could have been Mishnah Lamelech, they would have been involved in the royalty. On some level, because of this avera, not. But that gives rise to a second question, because in this parak it seems to say that whatever role Shaul's children would have had in Malchus was forfeited because he did not wait for Shmuel. We're going to read in parak Tesvav, which we'll get to later, that it was because of Amalek, his failure to kill Agag. So which was it? Again, some Meforshim say very simple, that it was an accumulation of both Averas. But I will discuss this again when we get to parak Tesvav. So be it as it may, at this point, Shmuel tells Shaul that your sin of not waiting, your sin of jumping the gun, your sin of making your own cheshbonos, that the people are leaving, so I have to act, means you are not mevatel yourself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's why your children shall not have a continuity in Malchus. Vayakam Shmuel v'yal min ha-Gilgal Givat Binyamin, and Shmuel left Gilgal after the rest of the korbanos were brought. He went to Givat Binyamin, and that's where the Jewish army was being assembled. Vayifkod Shaul esam nimtza mimo kishesh meyosish. So at this point, Shaul is pretty much with a very small army. He doesn't even have his 3,000 people. He only has 600 people against a huge Philistine army. V'Shaul v'Yonasan b'nai v'Ya'am nimtza imam, and Shaul and Yonasan and the people with them, which is only 600 people, are in Geva Binyamin. Pelishtim chanu b'michmash. Again, I have a little bit of a problem here. Sometimes it is michmas, and sometimes it's michmash. Apparently, the pronunciation went both ways, and I'm not sure why we have this difference. Here it says michmash. Vayetze hamashchis mimachane pelishtim shalosha rashim. So the Philistines have a huge army, and the mashchis, the destructive military force, leaves the encampment of the Philistines in Michmash, Shalosha Rashim, in 3 different groupings. Haraisha Echad Yifne La Derech Afcha El Eretz Shual. One group turns to the road of Afra, the road to Afra, towards the land of Shual. Again, these are designating the areas where the army is going. Harosh Echad Yifne Derech Beis Choron, and the second is heading in the road towards Beis Charon. Harosh Echad Yifne Derech Hagvol Hanishkaf Al Gei Hatzvoim Hamidbora, and the other is turning towards in the direction of the Philistine border, which overlooks the valley of the Tzvoim towards the desert. Again, we're not exactly sure where all these places are, but it's simply telling me that the overwhelming army of the Philistines is moving in 3 different directions to be able to decimate as many Jewish cities as possible. Now, Pasuk Yutes then records a very, very interesting historical detail of the time, and that is, V'charash lo yimatzei b'chol Eretz Yisrael. In all of Eretz Yisrael, there were no blacksmiths or metal workers. The Philistines did not allow blacksmiths or metal workers in Eretz Yisrael. Ki amru pelishtim pen yasu ha'ivrim cherev o chanit. The Philistines, who were the de facto, Shaul was king, but Lamaisa, control of the country, was in the hands of the Philistines. And the Philistines were afraid that the Jewish people would make swords and spears, weapons. It's like gun control. And therefore the Philistines did not allow any metal workers to be in Eretz Yisrael. So what if I'm a farmer and I have to sharpen my plow? So what Taka says, Vayerdu kol Yisrael haplishtim. You had to go to a Philistine. Lil taish ish es machrashto, to sharpen my plow blade. Eto, my spades. Kardumo, my axes. Machareshiso, again, these are various spades or shovels. Vahaisa hapsira pim. All people had individually, psira pim are little files, like a nail file. They had a little file where they could sharpen something. Lamachreshos, ulietim, v'lishalosh kilshon, if they had pitchforks of 3 prongs. Kardumim, for axes. Lahatziv darban, darban is a cattle prod, meaning they didn't really have the ability to make weapons. They had little nail files that they could sharpen. So therefore there were no weapons. So not only does Shaul have such a small number of people, 600, but they don't have weapons. V'haya b'yom milchamet, the day of war, v'lai nimtza cherev v'chanit b'yad kol ha'am, asher et Shaul v'es Yonasan. They didn't have swords, they didn't have spears, the army of Shaul and Yonasan. But Timatzei l'Shaul Yonasan b'nai. The only people that had weapons were Shaul and Yonasan. And now we're going to get into the war. Vayetze matzav pelishtim el mavar michmash. And now the Philistine army is leaving Michmash, and they're going in these 3 directions. And that is the end of Perek Yud Gimel. Perek Yud Dalet will discuss the actual conduct of the war. Shalom.